What if everything you know about human evolution is missing one crucial ingredient? What if the leap from primitive ape to self-aware human, the biggest mystery in all of science, wasn't driven by tools or fire or climate change alone? What if it was driven by something far stranger? A tiny mushroom growing in cattle dung on the African savanna that rewired the primate brain and gave birth to human consciousness itself. This is the Stoned Ape Theory, one of the most controversial, fascinating, and surprisingly well-supported ideas in evolutionary science. And by the end of this video, you may never look at human history the same way again. Here is the problem that has haunted scientists for over a century. Around 2 million years ago, our ancestors were simple creatures. Homo erectus had a brain roughly the size of a chimpanzee's, about 600 cubic centimeters. They used basic stone tools. They lived in small groups. They were, by any measure, unremarkable animals. Then, something extraordinary happened. In what scientists call the cognitive revolution, the human brain nearly tripled in size, exploding to over 1,400 cubic centimeters. This is one of the most rapid expansions of any organ in the entire history of life on Earth. And with that expansion came everything that makes us human: language, art, music, religion, abstract thought, the ability to imagine things that don't exist. But here's the thing, no one can fully explain why it happened. Traditional theories point to cooking with fire, social complexity, or tool use, but none of these fully account for the speed and scale of the transformation. Something is missing from the story, and in 1992, a man named Terence McKenna proposed a radical answer. Terence McKenna was no ordinary scientist. An ethnobotanist, philosopher, and self-described psychonaut, McKenna had spent years studying indigenous cultures and their use of psychoactive plants across the Amazon and beyond. He was brilliant, controversial, and utterly unafraid to challenge conventional thinking. In his groundbreaking 1992 book, Food of the Gods, McKenna laid out a sweeping theory of human evolution that would become known as the Stoned Ape Hypothesis. His central argument was audacious. He proposed that psilocybin mushrooms, the same magic mushrooms known for producing profound psychedelic experiences, were not just recreational substances, but were in fact the primary catalyst that transformed our ape ancestors into modern humans. The missing evolutionary link, McKenna argued, was not a fossil. It was a fungus. McKenna's theory was elegant in its structure. He proposed that as Africa dried out millions of years ago, our primate ancestors were forced out of shrinking forests and onto the open grasslands. There, they followed herds of wild cattle, not just for meat, but for the insects living in their dung. And growing in that dung, they would have found Psilocybe cubensis, one of the most common psychoactive mushrooms in the world. McKenna argued that different doses produce different evolutionary advantages. At low doses, psilocybin sharpened visual acuity, particularly edge detection. Early hunters who ate small amounts of mushrooms could literally see prey more clearly, giving them a survival advantage. At medium doses, McKenna claimed the mushrooms increased arousal, social bonding, and sexual energy. Groups that consumed them together would have experienced greater cohesion and more frequent reproduction. And at high doses, psilocybin triggered something even more profound: synesthesia, visionary experiences, and most critically, the activation of language centers in the brain. McKenna believed this was the spark that gave birth to human language itself. The mushroom, he argued, was an evolutionary catalyst operating at every level of human development. When McKenna first proposed his theory, the scientific community largely dismissed it as colorful speculation. But in the 3 decades since Food of the Gods was published, something remarkable has happened. the science has begun to catch up. Modern neuroscience has discovered that psilocybin is what researchers call a psychoplastogen, a substance that rapidly promotes neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself. Brain imaging studies now show that psilocybin dramatically increases connectivity between neural networks that don't normally communicate with each other. Under psilocybin, the brain lights up with entirely new patterns of activity. At the cellular level, the findings are even more striking. Psilocybin stimulates neurogenesis, the growth of entirely new neurons. It promotes dendritogenesis, the branching of neural connections, and it triggers synaptogenesis, the formation of new synaptic pathways. It also boosts levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, a protein essential for neural growth and survival. These are not subtle effects. A single dose of psilocybin can produce measurable changes in brain structure that persist for weeks or even months. Terence McKenna, Terence's brother and a respected ethnopharmacologist, has pointed to these discoveries as precisely the mechanistic evidence that was missing in 1992. Psilocybin doesn't just change how you think. It literally changes the physical architecture of your brain. Of course, not everyone is convinced. Critics raise several important objections. First, there is no direct fossil evidence that our ancestors consumed psilocybin mushrooms. No ancient mushroom remains have been found at hominid sites, though mushrooms decompose rapidly and would be unlikely to fossilize. Second, scientists have pointed out that McKenna may have overstated the visual acuity claims. While psilocybin does alter visual perception, modern research suggests it may actually impair precise vision rather than enhance it. Third, there is the Lamarckism problem. For psilocybin to drive evolution, the brain changes it. Causes would need to become heritable, passed from parent to offspring. Traditional genetics says acquired traits can't be inherited. However, the emerging field of epigenetics has complicated this picture. We now know that environmental factors can indeed switch genes on and off in ways that persist across generations, and critics also point to counterexamples. The Aztecs used psychedelic mushrooms extensively, yet practiced human sacrifice. Several Amazonian tribes use ayahuasca regularly while engaging in violent warfare, seemingly contradicting McKenna's claim that psychedelics inevitably suppress ego and create peaceful societies. In recent years, a new generation of researchers has attempted to update McKenna's original vision. Cognitive neuroscientist Bobby Azarian has proposed what he calls the new Stoned Ape Theory. Rather than claiming psilocybin directly mutated human DNA, Azarian argues that psychedelics triggered what he calls cognitive cultural phase transitions. In this model, psilocybin didn't change our genes directly. It changed our minds, and those changed minds created new ideas, new social structures, new ways of seeing the world. These cultural innovations then spread through populations, going viral in modern terms, and created entirely new selection pressures that favored bigger, more flexible brains. It is evolution driven not by genetics alone, but by culture, with psychedelics as the chemical catalyst that sparked the Cultural Revolution in the first place. Paul Stamets, the world-renowned mycologist, has also championed the theory, pointing to psilocybin's effects on nerve growth factor and BDNF as serious candidates for explaining the rapid brain expansion. As Stamets told a stunned audience, "There is no explanation in evolutionary biology for this sudden increase in the human brain. Psilocybin's effects on neurogenesis make it a serious candidate." Whether you find the Stoned Ape Theory compelling or outrageous, one thing is undeniable. It forces us to ask the deepest possible question about ourselves. What made us human? Was it fire, tools, language, or was it something far more mysterious? A chemical key hidden in the dung of cattle on the grasslands of ancient Africa, that unlocked the doors of perception and transformed a clever animal into a conscious being. Terence McKenna died in the year 2000, but his ideas have never been more alive. The psychedelic renaissance sweeping modern medicine and neuroscience has vindicated many of his core intuitions. Psilocybin is now in Phase 3 clinical trials for depression. Brain imaging studies confirm its extraordinary effects on neural connectivity. And the question McKenna posed in Food of the Gods, the question of whether mushrooms helped make us who we are, remains one of the most provocative and haunting questions in all of science. Perhaps the greatest irony is this: in a universe of billions of galaxies, on a tiny planet orbiting an unremarkable star, the secret to human consciousness may have been hiding in the most humble of places, growing quietly in the dung, waiting to be found.